We'll get started with the education and historical background, and we will start with a presentation that is titled Anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, a brief introduction in observance of International Holocaust Remembrance Day, created and narrated by Michael Miller, certified peer specialist. So take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Giselle. 76 years ago today, on January 27, 1945, soldiers of the Soviet Army came to a halt near the town of Auschwitz. Located 31 miles west of Krakow in southwestern Poland, the town had not gone by its Polish name, Oświęcim, in the 6 years since Nazi Germany had occupied Poland. Although it had an 800-year history, it is now remembered only for what occurred there between 1940 and 1945. In that half-decade, over 1 million people, most of them Jewish, were tortured, worked to death, starved, and murdered in Auschwitz. On November 1st, 2005, the United Nations officially recognized the liberation of the camp as International Holocaust Remembrance Day. The Holocaust was the culmination of over 2,000 years of resentment, fear, and hatred directed against the Jewish minority in Europe. There have been too many instances of discrimination to list them all in this short presentation, and the rationale used by the oppressors of Jews are as diverse as the genocidal actions they took. To put it simply, anti-Semites see Jews as outsiders who do not fully assimilate into the countries in which they live because they maintain a distinct cultural and religious identity. In the earliest years of Christendom, Jews were vilified for their refusal to accept Jesus Christ as the Messiah, the biblically foretold savior of mankind, and were even falsely blamed for the crucifixion. Throughout history, they were a convenient scapegoat to be accused of even the most murderous conspiracies. Among the most infamous of these was the blood libel, the claim that they would kidnap Christian children before Passover and drain their blood for use in the baking of matzo. Massive numbers of Jews were butchered by the Crusaders in 1096 and expelled from England in 1290. Even as Jews died alongside Christians during the Black Death in the mid-14th century, they were blamed for the bubonic plague and massacred by the thousands. During the Spanish Inquisition, they were tortured and murdered and eventually ejected from Spain in 1492. Many of them made their way to Eastern Europe, where they established a thriving culture, but were often slaughtered in mass killings known as pogroms. The Catholic Church imposed numerous laws and prohibitions upon them and forced them to live in squalid areas of cities known as ghettos to set them apart from the Gentile communities. In his 1543 book, On the Jews and Their Lies, Martin Luther, the father of the Protestant Reformation, demanded the expulsion of Jews from Germany and the burning of their synagogues. Centuries later, Nazi bureaucrats and propagandists used those early examples of anti-Semitic legislation and rhetoric as a blueprint for their own laws and propaganda against the Jewish people. And there. By 1933, Jews had lived in Germany for over 1,600 years. Although they had achieved full political rights during the 19th century, they were still considered outsiders in German society. A movement of prominent political figures developed a new and more sophisticated anti-Semitism, one that claimed Jews were anthropologically inferior and that it was their blood, not their religious faith, that made them an existential threat to Germany. In the aftermath of World War I, Jews were accused of evading military service and stabbing the German army in the back by orchestrating revolution on the home front. Contrary to that belief, at least 100,000 Jews served in the German army and 12,000 lost their lives in the war. But the old prejudices remained strong and were renewed by the suffering that affected Germany after 1918, a time of civil war, economic crisis, and what many saw as an overall decay of society. Out of this turmoil came an angry and charismatic soldier, originally from Austria, with a great talent for stirring up the anger and bitterness of his audience. From the beginning of his political career, the anti-Semitism of Adolf Hitler was the foundation of his worldview. Although Jews represented less than 1% of Germany's population, he assured his followers that all of the country's problems could be attributed to the alleged malice and destructiveness of the Jew. His message of hate and promises of a return to greatness resonated with many people of all social classes, and by the end of the 1920s, the National Socialist German Workers' Party had over 100,000 members. Early in the building of his movement, Hitler relied on an army of street-fighting thugs, many of whom were veterans of World War I. This was the Sturmabteilung, or SA, the storm troops, which protected Hitler and other party leaders as they spoke at public events. They also assaulted Jews and engaged in street brawls with political opponents. By 1934, they numbered over 3 million men. In 1923, Hitler ordered the creation of a private security detachment, which became known as the Schutzstaffel, or SS. The longest-serving head of the SS was Heinrich Himmler, who led the organization from 1929 to 1945. Described by the historian Richard Breitman as the architect of genocide, Himmler worked tirelessly to increase the strength of his organization and its value to Hitler. When Himmler took over the SS, it had 50,000 members and was subordinated to the SA. In 1931, he appointed a 27-year-old disgraced former Navy officer, Reinhard Heydrich, to head the Sicherheitsdienst, or SD, an intelligence service for the SS and Nazi Party. After Hitler assumed power in 1933, Himmler and Heydrich set about to take control of the political police throughout Germany. In the summer of 1934, they oversaw a bloody purge of the SA, having falsely accused its leader, Ernst Röhm, of plotting a revolt against Hitler. From that point on, the SS was independent of the SA and grew to become the most powerful organization in Nazi Germany. Himmler and Heydrich were then given control of the Geheime Staatspolizei, or Gestapo, the secret state police. In 1936, Hitler gave Himmler authority over all the police forces of the Third Reich. As early as 1933, with the establishment of Dachau, Himmler controlled an ever-expanding network of concentration camps where political opponents were tormented and often murdered. Jewish inmates were treated with particular brutality. Nazi propaganda against the Jews. Political and racial propaganda was an integral aspect of Hitler's movement from the start. It often included accusations against the Jews for all the suffering Germany had endured during and after World War I, with anti-Semitism being a prominent feature of virtually every speech Hitler delivered. The most virulent anti-Semitic propagandist was Julius Streicher, the Nazi Gauleiter or regional leader in Nuremberg. In 1923, he established the newspaper Der Stürmer, which was devoted to crudely and viciously demonizing the Jews. It became one of the most popular newspapers in Germany. A more educated and sophisticated kind of anti-Semite, Dr. Joseph Goebbels, Gauleiter of Berlin, was appointed as Minister of Propaganda in 1933. He controlled all media and entertainment in Nazi Germany and worked to cleanse the nation of Jews and their influence. He later worked to encourage the annihilation of the Jewish people throughout Europe. The Nuremberg Laws. On September 15, 1935, during the annual Nazi Party rally, the Nuremberg Laws were unveiled. These defined Jews on a racial basis. Religion was irrelevant. If one had 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents, one was a Jew in Nazi eyes. The laws resulted in revocation of German citizenship and criminalized sexual relations or marriage between Jews and people of so-called German blood. After the issuance of the Nuremberg Laws and following a brief hiatus while Germany hosted the 1936 Olympic Games, in which Jewish athletes were not allowed to participate, persecution was stepped up. The main goal was to rid Germany of Jews by making life intolerable for them and encouraging their emigration. Among the official actions taken against German Jews in this period were the following. Jewish identification cards were stamped with a red J, and they were forced to change their middle names. For men, the name was Israel. For women, it was Sarah. In a policy known as Aryanization, the Nazi government forced Jewish owners to sell their businesses to non-Jewish Germans at greatly reduced prices. The Jewish managers and employees were then fired. Jewish doctors were only allowed to treat Jewish patients, and Jewish students only allowed to attend Jewish schools. Jewish lawyers were banned from practicing law in any way. Unfortunately, most countries, including the United States, generally refused to accept Jewish refugees, leaving them no escape from Nazi persecution. On November 8, 1938, Herschel Greenspan, a 17-year-old German Jew whose parents had been forcibly deported to Poland, assassinated a German diplomat, Ernst vom Rath, in Paris. In response, Goebbels delivered a speech to Nazi leaders in Munich demanding revenge. The result was a nationwide outburst of destruction and violence. In a single night, 267 synagogues were destroyed, 1,400 synagogues, prayer rooms, and cemeteries were damaged, and over 7,000 Jewish shops and 29 department stores were damaged or destroyed. At least 200 Jews were murdered, and 30,000 men were arrested and sent to concentration camps. In the aftermath, an estimated 600 Jews committed suicide. The German government then fined the Jewish community 1 billion Reichsmarks for damages. This is roughly equivalent to $7 billion today. Although no written order exists for the total extermination of the European Jews, Hitler made numerous references to his desire to rid the continent of the Jewish people. One of the best-known examples is a speech that he delivered to the German parliament, the Reichstag, on January 30th, 1939. If the international Jewish financiers in and outside Europe should succeed in plunging the nations once more into a world war, then the result will not be the Bolshevization of the earth and thus the victory of Jewry, but the annihilation of the Jewish race in Europe. September 1st, 1939, the invasion of Poland. As the German army invaded Poland, it was followed by small units of Heydrich's security police called Einsatzgruppen. Among their tasks was the murder of Polish politicians, lawyers, doctors, professors, Catholic priests, and Jews. The goal was to decapitate the nation so that it could become fully absorbed into Nazi Germany. The German occupation of Poland resulted in the annexation of previously disputed border areas and the creation of a vast territory called the General Government, which served as a pool of slave labor and industrial production for the German war machine. Jews were subject to mandatory forced labor and confined to enclosed ghettos. To help them administer the Jews in these ghettos and achieve maximum labor output from them, the Nazis appointed Judenräte, Jewish councils, led by influential members of the Jewish community. The concentration of Jews in ghettos, most of which were established near railway lines, made it easier for their eventual transportation to extermination camps. The Einsatzgruppen in the Soviet Union. On June 22, 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Following the advancing German army were 4 mobile killing squads of the SS Security Police and Security Service, tasked with liquidating Communist Party functionaries, Jews, and other perceived enemies. These were designated Einsatzgruppen A, B, C, and D. The majority of their leaders were educated men, mostly lawyers and some with doctorates. Although they numbered only 3,000 men, these units had help from thousands of indigenous collaborators from the Baltic states, Belarus, and Ukraine, as well as members of the regular police. The Einsatzgruppen killed over 1 million people, mostly Jews, over the next 2 years. Although relying primarily on rifles and machine guns, they also murdered some 97,000 people with gas vans, vehicles with the exhaust pipes redirected into the sealed rear compartment. The Wannsee Conference. On January 20th, 1942, Heydrich chaired a meeting at a villa on the Berlin lake of Wannsee. 15 senior officials of Germany's government ministries, as well as the SS and police, including the head of the Gestapo, Heinrich Müller, and the head of his Jewish affairs office, Adolf Eichmann, met to decide on a, quote, final solution of the Jewish question in Europe. There it was decided to physically exterminate every Jew within the German sphere of influence in Europe. Eichmann and his team of deportation specialists were to facilitate the transportation of Jews from all over Europe to the killing facilities in Poland. The Aktion Reinhardt extermination camps. The Aktion Reinhardt extermination camps of Belzec, Treblinka, and Sobibor existed only for the murder of Jews. They were established in the Lublin district of Poland by the SS and police leader Odilo Globocnik, who oversaw the extermination of Poland's Jews in a program called Aktion Reinhardt. Many of the Germans and Austrians who staffed these camps already had experience as murderers, having previously worked in the so-called euthanasia program that killed as many as 200,000 mentally and physically disabled Germans. The killing method employed at these camps was carbon monoxide gas chambers of the kind previously used in the euthanasia program. The death tolls per camp were as follows: Belzec, 430,000 to 500,000; Treblinka, 700,000 to 900,000; Sobibor, 170,000 to 250,000. Auschwitz was established early in 1940 to hold members of the Polish resistance, as well as common criminals and Jews. The first commandant was a ruthless, longtime concentration camp officer and talented organizer named Rudolf Höss. The Auschwitz complex was divided into three parts. Auschwitz I was the main camp, a concentration camp modeled after those in Germany. Auschwitz II, or Birkenau, was established as a camp for Soviet prisoners of war in 1941. In 1942, it became the site of the camp's gas chambers and crematoria. Unlike the other death camps in Poland, which relied on carbon monoxide gas produced by internal combustion engines, at Birkenau the SS used a pesticide publicly marketed under the name Zyklon B. Until Himmler ordered a halt to gassing in October 1944, trains arrived at Auschwitz from all over Europe on a daily basis. In the spring and summer of 1944 alone, over 400,000 Hungarian Jews were murdered in the gas chambers of Auschwitz II. Auschwitz III, Monowitz, was an industrial and chemical plant where slave labor was performed by the powerful German chemical conglomerate IG Farben. That is, performed for IG Farben. 1,095,000 Jews were deported to Auschwitz, of whom 960,000 perished. Numerous other classifications of people were held within the electrified barbed wire of the camp as follows: 140,000 to 150,000 non-Jewish Poles, of whom 74,000 died; 23,000 Sinti and Roma deported, of whom 21,000 died; 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war deported, all of whom died; 25,000 members of other nationalities deported, with 10,000 to 15,000 perishing in the camp. On January 17, 1945, the Nazis began to evacuate Auschwitz, with 58,000 inmates being marched to the west. They then blew up the gas chambers and crematoria. When the Soviet army arrived 10 days later, only about 7,500 inmates remained. Jewish resistance. There's a common and insulting misconception that the Jews went passively and obediently to their deaths. In truth, Jews participated in resistance movements throughout Europe. Especially in the East, they actively fought the Nazi occupation as partisans and guerrillas. When the SS and German police began their liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto in April 1943, planning to send all the remaining inhabitants to the gas chambers of Treblinka, they were met with bullets and hand grenades. Although tremendously outnumbered and ultimately unsuccessful, the Jewish Fighting Organization, under 24-year-old Mordecai Anielewicz, fought off thousands of heavily armed soldiers for nearly a month. When it became clear that further resistance was impossible, Anielewicz and a number of his fighters committed suicide rather than be captured. I have been reading and writing about the Holocaust for the past 40 years. In my research of the topic, I have focused and written primarily on the perpetrators. There is a common tendency among people to see them as the epitome of evil, somehow different from us. But it took millions of people to carry out this genocide. The average German soldier who fought to occupy the countries where the Jews were ultimately rounded up, the SS, German policemen, and indigenous collaborators who pulled the triggers, the civilian bureaucrats who drafted anti-Jewish laws, the employees of the German railway system that delivered Jews to their death, the employees of the Nazi administration in occupied territories, the men and women who guarded concentration camps, the generals of the SS and police, and Hitler himself. All of them, as well as their collaborators in foreign countries, made the Holocaust possible. These were not millions of sociopaths. They were, as Christopher Browning titled a book on German policemen who'd killed thousands of Polish Jews, ordinary men. These were people conditioned to obey authority even when that meant murdering children. Many factors brought about the Holocaust, but none more so than unconditional obedience combined with a 2,000-year tradition of dehumanizing and demonizing Jews. It is difficult for most of us to conceive of such cruelty and suffering. What I've just read is simply the raw data of the Holocaust. It doesn't even begin to express the full horror, the human cost, and the pain that reverberates to this day in those whose families suffered in this massive tragedy. The Holocaust is the most thoroughly documented crime of all history. Its every facet, the events, the victims and survivors, the perpetrators, and its impact on our world has been revealed in countless books, films, songs, poems, videotape testimony, every form of media. To simply treat it as history, as events long past and mostly forgotten, is to miss out on the many lessons it holds for current and future generations. Chief among these is the simple fact that something as inconceivable as the extermination of millions of human beings was and remains possible. A modern industrialized nation of culture and technological advancement can decide that various classifications of people are undeserving of human rights or even the basic right to exist. And ordinary, otherwise decent people can stand by and let it happen.